Welcome to JusticeTrek. My name is Ted Kilvington, and this is an audio and video log that journeys through comic book history as I discuss individual comic book stories of Star Trek, the Justice Society, and the world's greatest superheroes, the Justice League of America. JusticeTrek is the only show devoted to the entirety of these great comic book series, from the 1940 debut of the JSA, the launch of the JLA and Star Trek comic books in the 1960s, and right up to comics hot off today's shelves. This show will impact you in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Hey, I'm Ted Kilvington, and I'd like to welcome you to the very first episode of this audio and video project, JusticeTrek. In today's episode, I will be talking about the classic Justice League of America number 137, published in 1976 by DC Comics. Now you may wonder, what makes this comic book a classic? Well, it's the very first time those two great Golden Age comic book characters, Superman and the original Captain Marvel, also known as Shazam, first time they ever met. Now, I love this comic ever since I first read it in the 70s. Didn't have my own copy back then. I borrowed my cousin's comic book, and a few years later, when I was a teenager and I was able to go to a comic book store for the first time, that very first comic book store purchase was Justice League of America number 137. I've got a couple different copies of that story. I do have the very first, that very same comic book I bought in 1982, Justice League of America number 137. Another version of the story I have comes from the Crisis on Infinite Earths box set, which, among other things, reprinted all of the classic Justice League of America and Justice Society of America team-ups in the years preceding the Crisis on Infinite Earths crossover event. Now, on Volume 4 of the Crisis on Multiple Earths collection, we have the original cover, that same one I just showed you, on the back of the book. And on the front cover of this book, we have a redrawn version of that same comic, this time redrawn by artist Carrie Gamble. Now, you probably can't tell the details very well in this small image, at least small as it appears on your screen. So, as I said, I love this comic, and I have this in poster size as well. So here you can tell we have the Justice League of America logo at the top, and then over the Rock of Eternity, we have Superman and Captain Marvel flying into combat. So who would win? What would happen? Well, I, for one, couldn't wait to find out. You know, I love Superman from the Saturday morning Super Friends comic and cartoon in the 70s. I loved Captain Marvel from the live-action TV series in the 70s. So believe you me, I was thrilled to see them meet and fight in action. So this image, though, didn't only appear on books, comic books, posters. It also appeared on my t-shirt. So used in clothing. Now, another time that image was used was for this action figure set, wherein we have an exclusive limited edition Justice League of America number 137 action figures of Superman and Shazam with that same cover image. And finally, you know, I was getting cold feet about doing this podcast. So in order to keep my feet warm, I have a pair of Justice League of America number 137 socks. That's right, a pair of Justice League of America number 137 socks. I'd like to thank my lovely daughters, Dorothy and Alice Kilvington, for the gift. I assumed they picked it out for me because they saw the poster hanging up in the house and they thought, oh, well, Dad likes that comic. We'll get him these socks. They replied, oh, well, those are the only superhero socks they had. Either way, I'm thrilled to have it. So, let's see. Now, the reason why I'm covering this comic first is because, as I said, it's my favorite comic book. This is the comic book that inspired me to get into collecting in the first place. You know, lots of characters, dozens, literally dozens of characters, many of whom I'd never heard of. In fact, a couple of whom probably haven't been heard of since. But you know, just thrilling to me to see them all together. And you heard, of course, about the multiverse. I mean, these days, the multiverse is winning Oscars, such as in the recent movie Everything Everywhere All at Once, starring Michelle Yeoh. Won Oscars for Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actress, Best Supporting Actress, and Best Supporting Actor. So saw a film. It was a great film. I liked it. Back in the 80s, they said, oh, multiverse is confusing. We need to get rid of multiverses because they're confusing. Now, of course, they've been doing Crisis on Infinite Earths TV shows. Marvel's doing the multiverse saga in their cinematic universe. You know, as I said, multiverse movies are winning Oscars. So, to me, that was my introduction to the multiverse, and I couldn't get enough of it. You know, on that cover image, not only do we have Superman and Captain Marvel, but we also have the Earth 2 versions of Wonder Woman, Batman, and Robin. And the costumes of Batman and Robin were a little different from the Earth 1 versions. So Batman, for example, did not have the yellow oval on his chest. Robin wore long pants. And of course, I'm wondering, well, why? Why are their costumes different? Now, unfortunately, because of the page limitation at the time, they didn't have enough pages to really get into detail of all the characters in the story. So it wasn't until I read the comic trilogy in full from JLA 135, 136, and 137 in 1982 when I made those back issue purchases. Then I eventually learned why it was the Batman of Earth 2 and the Robin of Earth 2 and many other characters from Earth 1, Earth 2, and Captain Marvel's home planet, home parallel Earth, Earth S, S for Shazam. So a little bit of background about me. My name is Ted Kilvington, as I said. I am a 54-year-old court software analyst. I live with my lovely wife, Charlotte, in the town of Mason, Michigan. I've got 6 children, ranging in age from 26 to 35. I am a United Methodist lay leader, former member of the United States Air Force. And although I telecommute to my day job, the organization for whom I am employed, doing the court software, is headquartered in, believe it or not, the Michigan Hall of Justice. When they first built that building back in the early 2000s, I said, someday I'm going to work there. And it took me 19 years, but I eventually got to work there, albeit remotely. So whenever somebody asks me what my favorite comic books are, as they often do when I tell them that I collect comic books, what's your favorite superhero? I always reply, I like the Justice League of America because it's got all of the best superheroes. And as I mentioned earlier, in the 70s, I would watch Shazam on the live action Saturday morning, and I would watch the Super Friends show on Saturday mornings. And then, that just inspired me to keep buying and reading and buying and collecting comics to the point where I now own over 30,000 comic books. You can see these shelves here. That's just scratching the surface. I have 6 racks of comic book boxes full of comic books, over 30,000. And that is just including the individuals. That doesn't even include the number of books I have, such as these omnibuses that reprint multiple comics. You include those, all of the reprint versions, and the duplicates, such as JLA 137, the original issue, and the reprint in the hardcover book. Then I've got over 35,000 comic books. So when I say this is my vault of comic books or vault of justice, I mean that literally. I mean, it's not sealed. I don't have a big steel door yet. But I'm just really glad to have this chance to collect comic books, talk about comic books, and share my passion with you, the viewer and or listener. I had done a previous version of JusticeTrek, audio-only podcast, which ran from 2016 to 2017. I did over 100 episodes at the time, and I did some with my wife, talked about comic books, talked about some Star Trek stuff, hence the name JusticeTrek. But I got out of it when the pandemic hit in 2020. Actually, my last episode I recorded was a few months before that in 2019. But last summer, I was asked to be part of this year's JL May podcast crossover event. And I was thrilled at the offer to be a part of the event. So I said, yes, I would love to be part of JL May. Have my own podcast talk about JL May. In this year, the podcast event will be talking about the 2007 comic book series, The Brave and the Bold. Not to be confused with the 1955 comic book series or the 1992 comic book series, also called The Brave and the Bold. But this is the 2007 version, which was originally written by Mark Waid and illustrated by the late, great George Perez. Now, if I'm going to have an episode of my podcast crossover with JL May, I needed to have a podcast. So I decided I would resurrect JusticeTrek, and this time I'm not going to talk about other comic books, just Justice League, Justice Society, and Star Trek. No, I'm not going to talk about movies. If I read a Star Trek comic and I talk about it with you, and you say, well, hey, that isn't canon. It's canon within the comic book. Perhaps not the movies or TV shows, but we're only talking about the comic books here, folks. And that's why I'm here with you today. My plan is on Fridays, I'll be Justice Fridays, where I talk about the JLA and JSA and a few Crisis on Infinite Earth stories. And then on Tuesdays, it'll be Trek Tuesdays, where I talk about Star Trek comic books. And I plan on covering all of them, until I either die or my voice gives out on me, whichever comes first. So I'm going to start on next Tuesday with the Gold Key Star Trek #1. I'm also going to cover comic books from the Star Trek comics from Marvel, from DC, and from IDW. They're still making great Star Trek comics. I'm still reading about Star Trek comics, and I'm going to talk about those comics with you. Okay, let's get into our discussion of Justice League of America number 137. Characters appearing in this issue are the Justice League of America of Earth 1, including Superman, the Hal Jordan Green Lantern, the Barry Allen Flash, the Thanagarian police officer Hawkman Katar Hall, and the Green Arrow. We also have the Justice Society of America of Earth 2, including that Earth's Batman, Wonder Woman, the Dick Grayson Robin, the Alan Scott Green Lantern, the Jay Garrick Flash, and that Earth's Johnny Thunder. Other characters include, from Earth 1, the alien police officer Hawk Girl Shayera Tal, who was not yet a member of the JLA, and Superman's old foe, the alien humanoid computer menace known as Brainiac. I have a feeling we're going to be joined frequently by my kitten, who I think is getting jealous of the attention I'm giving you folks. So, if she pops up on the screen, she's jealous of you. Also from Earth 2, we have Johnny Thunder's Thunderbolt Genie. And from the parallel world of Earth S, we have the superheroes Captain Marvel, Mary Marvel, Captain Marvel Jr., Bullet Man, Bullet Girl, Ivis the Invincible, Mr. Scarlet, Pinky the Whiz Kid, and Spy Smasher, plus the ancient wizard Shazam, the Roman god Mercury, and the supervillains King Kull and Mr. Atom. Now, before we get into the plot of JLA-137, let me give you a little bit of background information on this story. In the first chapter of this trilogy, in Justice League of America number 135, King Kull devised a plan to gain vengeance on humanity by traveling to the Rock of Eternity at the center of the multiverse and using his immobilizing device, what he called a torpor beam, to place both the Roman gods who reside there as well as the wizard Shazam into suspended animation. However, the super swift god Mercury was able to outrun the beam and escape. Shazam heard of Kull's plan to kill all humans on Earth's S, 1, and 2, so then the wizard telepathically reached out to Mercury and informed him of a plan to defeat King Kull. Mercury then traveled to the 3 Earths and gathered 6 heroes from each Earth to help stop Kull's genocidal plans on each planet. Mercury gathers Green Arrow, Superman, Flash, Green Lantern, Hawkman, and Hawkgirl from Earth 1. The Roman god gathered Batman, Robin, Wonder Woman, Flash, Green Lantern, and Johnny Thunder from Earth 2. And the messenger of the gods, or the god of messengers, gathered Ibis the Invincible, Spy Smasher, Bullet Man, Bullet Girl, Mr. Scarlet, and Pinky the Whiz Kid from Earth S. To stop the threat to Earth 2, the Superman of Earth 1, the Wonder Woman of Earth 2, the Green Arrow of Earth 1, and the Spy Smasher from Earth S traveled to the risen island of Atlantis on Earth 2. There, the 4 heroes defeat 4 of Kull's agents: Queen Clea of Atlantis from Earth 2, Batman's villains Blockbuster and Penguin from Earth 1, and Captain Marvel's old foe Eyeback from Earth S. In Justice League of America number 136, the Batman and Robin from Earth 2, the Hawkman and Hawkgirl from Earth 1, and Bulletman, Bullet Girl, Mr. Scarlet, and Pinky the Whiz Kid from Earth S saved Earth S from the devious devices of the Joker and Shade from Earth 2. That's the Joker of Earth 2 and the Shade of Earth 2. We also had from Earth 1 the villain Dr. Light and the Weeper from Earth S. At that same time, however, teenage newscaster Billy Batson was reporting on the events while wondering to himself why no magic lightning was being sent when he said the word Shazam. Billy talks to his companions, Mary Batson and Freddie Freeman, and learns that they too are unable to summon magic lightning, meaning none of them can turn into members of the Marvel family. Just then, Johnny Thunder of Earth 2 joins Billy, Mary, and Freddie to discuss the situation. That brings us up to Justice League of America number 137, which was published September 7th, 1976, with a 30-cent cover price and a December cover date. Crisis in Tomorrow was a 17-page story by E. Nelson Bridwell, who wrote the plot, Dick Dillon, who was the pencil artist, Martin Pasco, who wrote the dialogue, Frank McLaughlin, the ink artist, Ben Oda, letterer, and Julia Schwartz, editor. No colorist credits could be found. On Earth 1, the diabolical King Kull has dispatched Mr. Atom to destroy the futuristic model city known as Tomorrow, which was near the southern shore of Lake Michigan. The giant robot smashes through the city's transparent dome with a huge blast of atomic energy and begins a rampage of destruction. Just then, Green Lantern and Flash of Earth 1, Green Lantern and Flash of Earth 2, and Ibis the Invincible and the Roman god Mercury from Earth S confront the metallic behemoth, only to be thwarted by Mr. Atom's black force field aura. Ibis and the Green Lanterns use their Ibistic and power rings to create their own black auras, hoping that it will aid them in defeating their enemy, only to discover an energy trail that then led to the aura's power source. They then follow the energy trail while the fastest beings on 3 Earths move to save the people of tomorrow from Mr. Atom's rampage of destruction. In the sky, the trail has led Green Lantern, and Ibis to a flying saucer operated by Superman's old enemy, Brainiac. Alan Scott sees several people falling upward and goes to rescue them, while Hal Jordan uses his power ring to enter the ship only to be trapped by the black aura. Ibis, however, uses his magic to transmute Brainiac's ray gun into a robot octopus, trapping the evil alien computer intelligence and freeing Hal Jordan. Hal then uses his power ring to smash Brainiac's console, which shuts down Mr. Adam's force field. The two Green Lanterns then locate and destroy a machine that was causing the Earth's rotation to speed up, which is what caused people to fall upwards into the sky. Meanwhile, Flash, and Mercury are still trying to save people from Mr. Adam's rampage when Ibis flies back to take on the giant robot. However, Mr. Adam zaps Ibis with a ray that knocks him unconscious. The robot then grabs the Ibis stick and commands it to propel the turbaned one into a distant star. Unfortunately for Mr. Adam, the Ibis stick was magically programmed to aid its master by subjecting anyone who would use it to harm Ibis to whatever doom they sought to wreak against him. The menace of Earth-1 having been defeated, all 18 heroes returned to the Rock of Eternity, including the Wonder Woman of Earth-2, Spy Smasher, Green Lantern Alan Scott, Green Lantern Hal Jordan, the Hawkman of Earth-1, the Superman of Earth-1, Bullet Girl, Bullet Man, the Hawk Girl of Earth-1, the Mercury of Earth-S, Ibis the Invincible, the Batman of Earth-2, the Flash of Earth-1, the Flash of Earth-2, Mr. Scarlet, Pinky the Whiz Kid, the Green Arrow of Earth-1, and the Robin of Earth-2. However, King Kull was waiting for the heroes on the Rock of Eternity. As soon as Superman was nearby, Kull unleashed a chunk of the substance known as red kryptonite, and this particular chunk of red kryptonite drove Superman mad with a burning desire to kill. Back on Earth-S, the JSA member Johnny Thunder explained his mission to Billy Batson, Freddie Freeman, and Mary Batson, and then summoned his Bodnesian Thunderbolt genie. As soon as the Thunderbolt arrived, he transformed the three youths from Earth-S into their superhero identities of Captain Marvel, Mary Marvel, and Captain Marvel Jr. The Thunderbolt then transported the four heroes to the Rock of Eternity, where they went into action. Mary Marvel freed the wizard Shazam and the Roman gods. Captain Marvel Jr. smashed the Madman's machines, and Captain Marvel knocked out King Kull himself. Meanwhile, Alan Scott and Hal Jordan were using their Green Lantern energy to create green kryptonite to stop the rampaging Superman, only to learn that that same red kryptonite also immunized the Man of Steel against green kryptonite. Shazam then implored Captain Marvel to save everyone from the murderous rage of Superman. The big red cheese deduced that Superman is vulnerable to magic, so Captain Marvel flew toward the rampaging Kryptonian and started taunting him. The Man of Steel approached the red-clad hero, bellowing that he would kill his opponent, and just before the two flew into contact in the sky above the Rock of Eternity, Captain Marvel said his magic word, Shazam! And the now freed gods were able to send a magic thunderbolt that struck both heroes, transforming the captain back to Billy Batson and curing Superman of his red kryptonite poisoning. The now clear-headed Superman caught Billy, and then all of the heroes gathered and explained everything to everyone present. Then all 22 warriors departed back to their respective Earths, having earned their reputation as three world's greatest superheroes. The end. Okay, now let's get into my discussion, critique, if you will, notes, thoughts about this issue, JLA number 137. What I told you before was the printed version. What I'm going to tell you now is my take on that version. First off, the cover. I love this cover. I love it as a t-shirt. I love it as a poster. I love it as a pair of socks. I love the prominence of the Earth 2, Batman and Robin. You can't tell from the cover which Wonder Woman is being used, but still, I appreciated her since, of course, I knew Wonder Woman from both the live-action Wonder Woman TV show with Linda Carter, which was showing at that time in the 1970s, as well as the animated Wonder Woman appearing on the Super Friends. I also like the inclusion of Ibis the Invincible way down here in the corner. Since he does play a large part in this issue's story. The scene and cover copy provide a good reference for the story inside. So on the cover copy, it says, "This is it, the encounter you've been waiting for. Superman versus..." Sorry, it doesn't say Superman. It says, "The encounter you've been waiting for, the Big Red Cheese, meets the Big Red S." Now, the Big Red Cheese was a sort of derogatory nickname that was given to Captain Marvel by his arch enemy, the evil scientist Dr. Thaddeus Boggs Savannah, although it kind of stuck on with fans, and he was affectionately called the Big Red Cheese in the letter columns of his own series, Shazam, which was running at that time in the 1970s, published by DC Comics. I don't recall any other time where Superman was referred to as the Big Red S, however. It was apparently used just to create a kind of symmetry between the two appellations. That's two names, or the two nicknames, I guess. I don't mean the Appalachian Mountains, I mean Appellation, which is a fancy word for name. Page 1 is a one-panel splash page with the title and story credit. It is also a preview image of the battle ahead, which was an odd use of the very limited space within this 17-page comic. If with everything I told you about the plot description, trying to squeeze that into 16 pages, when you could have at least had one more page to tell the story, was a little odd. Now, on page 2, we have a nice setup of the City of Tomorrow, as well as an introduction of the menacing Mr. Atom, making his very first appearance since 1948. This was the first time I had ever heard or seen Mr. Atom, so it was a good introduction for me to the character. On page 3, I like how Mercury is teaming up with the heroes in this issue. Even though he is a speedster like the Flashes, it is made clear that he can fly. This is a nice detail from plotter E. Nelson Bridwell, as Captain Marvel not only got his super speed, but also his flying power from the Mercury of Earth S. Also, there's a bunch of expositional dialogue with the two Flashes and two Green Lanterns, and scripter Marty Pascoe had Ibis comment, "Gentlemen, you sound like bad actors struggling with purely expositional dialogue." So, of course, as a kid of age 8, when I first read this story, I had no idea what expositional meant, and I just appreciated that the characters were telling me things that I needed to know for the background to understand the story. But I also, as an adult, appreciate how Pascoe snuck in his own self-critique about how he was merely using those characters as a way, or using that particular dialogue to bring readers up to speed. It's not something that the two would have said to each other, since they already knew what was going on. On page 4, it was a nice touch to have Ibis used as the closest thing Fawcett Comics had to a Green Lantern. And the panels are laid out so that we have first the Science Lantern from Earth 1, and then the Magic Lantern from Earth 2, and then the Magic Wielder from Earth S. On page 5, I can see how Ibis could duplicate Mr. Atom's crackling black aura, but it didn't really make that much sense for me for the Green Lanterns to use their green energy to create black auras. On page 6, this comic came out in 1976, as I mentioned, and this was about 5 years before Disney World's Epcot opened. As you may or may not know, Epcot was an acronym that stood for Experimental Prototype Community of Tomorrow. And it was kind of Walt Disney's dream that Epcot would be a prototype for what he envisioned as the cities of tomorrow. Now, Walt did several presentations on his Epcot vision before he died in the 1960s, and writer E. Nelson Bridwell probably had that in mind when he was creating this setting. On page 7, we have an interesting plot twist where the speedsters, knowing they cannot defeat Mr. Atom, give up and just try to save people from the android's destruction. On page 8, when Hal Jordan first sees people falling upwards, it reminded him of the first time he saw that effect happen when the Justice League fought Dr. Destiny in JLA number 5. On page 9, the side effect of Hal Jordan turning into a visible skeleton inside his black aura, I thought, that was a very effective visual. It happened right when he entered Brainiac's ship, and just seeing the Green Lantern power ring and the Green Lantern mask on the skeleton of Hal Jordan inside the black aura, very effective. On page 10, when Brainiac's gun turned into an octopus, now that was a silly visual. It looked silly. It was probably meant to look silly. On page 11, it is mentioned here that the device that is speeding up the Earth's rotation is what was making people fall upwards. Now, if Earth's gravitational field was having that effect, wouldn't it happen to people all over the planet, not just in that one city? On page 12, there's an odd choice here to have Mr. Atom basically defeat himself by using the Ibis stick against Ibis. Now, on page 13, the chapter pagination, chapter page numbering, it's a little weird, as Brainiac's introduction is the beginning of a chapter, but the switch from tomorrow to the Rock of Eternity is in the middle of the next chapter. Also, this page has one of only 2 panels in this story in which most of the characters who appeared in the first 2 issues of the story arc, they actually appeared. So all those characters from JLA 135 and JLA 136, they didn't get any dialogue. They just were there in the background. On page 14, the transition of Superman from superhero to super killer, it only took a couple of panels. A story this massive and this eventful should have been spread out over more than 51 pages. The 1982 JLA JSA crossover used over twice as many pages and didn't have as many superheroes. On page 15, finally Captain Marvel shows up, only 49 pages into a 51-page story. On page 16, it was good of writers Bridwell and Pascoe to explain why the Green Lanterns couldn't defeat Superman, although if magic was the key to Super Killer's defeat, then Ibis in Shazam could have helped as well, with or without Captain Marvel. Page 17. And Captain Marvel stopping Superman and the hero's departure, and all closing exposition, is squeezed into 5 panels on the final page. One thing that bugged the heck out of me when I was a kid was, how is Batman supposed to drive the Batmobile, which is seen on the page, from the Rock of Eternity in the middle of the multiverse back to Gotham City of Earth 2? For some reason, all the heroes are shown departing in different directions, when you would think that at least the heroes that arrive from the same parallel Earth would leave together as well. I mean, as I learned when I eventually read 135, JLA 135, the Batmobile was brought to the Rock of Eternity by Mercury, and if the Mercury was going to transport the Batmobile back to Earth 2 with Batman inside it, wouldn't Robin also be inside it? So, in summary, as I've said, I love the comic. I love the cover. It's a great introduction to so many wonderful characters for me. And just that's what made me fall in love with comics. This is it. This is the touchstone. This is the foundation, the cornerstone of my comic love, my comic habit, my comic addiction. Don't judge me. Okay, so I'm also glad that I waited until after I saw the Shazam Fury of the Gods movie before recording this episode. If you haven't seen it yet, I loved it. It's certainly the best DC film, at least since Batman the Dark Knight. It was a very Shazam story, one that could only be told with those characters. It acknowledged everything in the first film. The villains I don't recall seeing before, but they were definitely villains that fit the Captain Marvel. Although, of course, in this movie, he's not called Captain Marvel since Marvel Comics took the trademark. I could tell you about that. I could probably devote a whole podcast about the legal issues involving Captain Litigant. But just suffice it to say that in the movie, they finally give the character, the Big Red Cheese, an actual name. My biggest problem with the first Shazam movie is that they went through the entire movie and they never gave the character a name. And of course, the Shazam movie came out at the same time, about 3 weeks difference, I think, with the Brie Larson Captain Marvel movie from the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And in those two movies that came out in spring of 2019, Shazam and Captain Marvel, not once in either movie did they use the phrase Captain Marvel. How bizarre is that? Two movies. And no one actually used the words Captain Marvel. So, I love the movie. If you haven't seen it, by all means, see it. I don't want to do any spoilers, but I will say, as I said, they do give him a name in the movie. You know, the performances were good. Another problem I had with the first movie is it seemed like there was a big age gap between the way Billy Batson was portrayed as a sullen 14-year-old and the superhero version was more like a 10-year-old. Whereas in this version, I thought they did a better balance of synchronizing the ages and how each character acted and was portrayed. You know, the other characters were great. The other versions of the Shazam family, I guess we'll call them. So again, if you haven't seen it, by all means, go out and see it. It's a great film. I can't recommend it enough. And again, back to this comic, you know, I loved it, made me fall in love. If you haven't had a chance to read it, by all means, go out and read it. You know, I'm pretty sure it's also available online, digitally. I do read some digital comics. I don't just buy paper versions. But for DC, it's pretty much almost all paper because a lot of them I've had, you know, I've been collecting them throughout my life. So just because I could read a digital version, you know, my collection is very well archived. And if I have a paper copy and I want to read the story, I just grab the paper copy. I've heard some fans talk about how, I can't find a comic in my collection. Well, it may be the fact that I spent 20 years in government records, but I know how to organize stuff.
If you have questions or comments, please feel free to send them to me on Twitter under the handle @JusticeTrek or via email at thejusticetrek@gmail.com. Be sure to include the word "the" at the beginning of the email address. For research purposes, I rely heavily on dc.fandom.com, memory-alpha.fandom.com, comicvine.gamespot.com, the Grand Comics database at comics.org, and Mike Voil's website, Mike's Amazing World of DC Comics at dcindexes.com. The opinions expressed are solely those of the host and any participants. This podcast is not a commercial enterprise and does not make any money. All copyrights are held by their respective owners. The opening sequence was animated by Craig Smith of Phoenix Studios. The opening music is Dragon Slayer by the Makai Symphony. The closing music pieces are the Superman theme, composed by John Williams, and the Star Trek theme from the original series, composed by Alexander Courage. Both closing songs are performed by the Superhero Orchestra. Under Section 107 of the Copyright Act of 1976, allowance is made for fair use for purposes such as criticism, comments, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, and research. Fair use is a use permitted by copyright statute that might otherwise be infringing. Nonprofit, educational, or personal use tips the balance in favor of fair use.
Well, I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I'd like to invite you to join me on the next episode, where I will cover 1967's Star Trek #1 from Gold Key Comics. Also, please join me for the following episode, where I will discuss the granddaddy of them all, the very first appearance of the Justice Society of America from 1940's All-Star Comics #3. I haven't mentioned it before, but this is going to be on YouTube, as well as streamed in audio format. So if you are on YouTube, hey, click like, click subscribe. And I also want to say, keep on Justice Trekking.